Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the August 17th edition of Horses to Watch, where we carefully analyze some trips looking for horses that might have encountered adversity and could be worth betting back when they run back in future starts. If you follow me on Twitter, you know that I put out a list of about 10 races from this past week that I was trying to narrow down to do on this show because there were so many trips I could have talked about. There was a situation on the inner turf course at Saratoga, which is where we will be focusing for this entire show, where the temporary rails came down and they are running right on the hedge. And typically when they do that at Saratoga, you see that hedge path on the inner turf course is a real advantage. So given that track bias, we had a lot of horses that got wide trips that are worth talking about. I've selected two of those inner turf trips to talk about, but I've also got two other races to mention on this show. And I'm actually going to be talking about only races from this past Sunday because there are a lot of races to choose from the entire week and many from just this one day. So we've got four races to talk about from last Sunday's card, August 15th at Saratoga. And let's start things off with the first race of that day. It's actually the only dirt race that I'm going to talk about on this show. This is a maiden claiming 40,000 for the 2-year-olds going 5.5 furlongs on the main track. Let's break these runners from the gate and look at the head-on of the start. And we're going to focus on the number 5, John's PROTEGE, a first-time starter for Wesley Ward. And you can see that this horse gets bumped from the outside. And then again, right after the start, gets bumped badly between horses, just really gets sawed off there, bumped from a horse inside of him. That's just as bad a start as you're going to see from a 2-year-old. And as we now switch to the pan shot, you're going to see that this horse is all the way at the back of the pack. And he's actually being ridden by David Flores, who was a top rider in California and around the country for many years, going back to the late 90s, early 2000s. He had been in retirement for a while, and he's doing some assistant training for Wesley Ward now. So he came out of retirement to ride this one horse. And it was just kind of a nightmare journey for your first ride back after a long time. And you see this first-time starter now advancing on the outside. He's at the back of the pack, starting to pass horses. And all things considered, given that it was just his debut, I thought this horse shows a lot of determination to make this run from the back of the pack to get up into a contending position by the time they get to the top of the stretch. And it briefly looks like he's going to flatten out a bit here, but he does stay on pretty well to ultimately finish second in this race. Now, I do have to say, this was a first-time starter for Wesley Ward, and if you follow Wesley Ward as a trainer, you know that typically you want his horses, when they make their debuts, they typically put forth their best efforts first time out. So I'm not sure that I really want to recommend this one as a bet back at the same competition level because he could take a lot of money off this trip. I would rather maybe follow him if he's a horse that goes out of town, if maybe he runs at a different circuit and people aren't as aware of this trip that he got at Saratoga, maybe moving up to the maiden special weight level, because I do think he has more ability than what we saw in this first race against Maiden Claiming Company. So not sure exactly where I'd want to bet him in the future, but I do think he's a horse that ran a lot better than the result would indicate. Now let's move on to some turf races, and we've got 3 to talk about from that Sunday card, beginning with the second race of the day. This is a maiden special weight going 1.16 miles on the inner turf course for the 2-year-olds. And as I said, this is an inner turf race, so the horses that were on the inside have an advantage in this race. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I want to talk about 2 contrasting trips, those of the number 8, Street Vendor, and the number 10, Flip the Script. And right out of the gate, you can see the difference because Flip the Script breaks much more alertly than Street Vendor, a horse who just didn't really know, he didn't look like he knew what he was doing, making his first start for Todd Pletcher, whereas Flip the Script was a second-time starter, having already made one start on the dirt. And you can see moving into the clubhouse turn here, Flip the Script gets a really good spot on the rail in behind the leaders. He had broken alertly on top, and Luis Saez, his rider, had guided him towards the front end, but some others were a little more aggressively ridden, so he had to stalk in behind those horses. But I gotta say, Flip the Script is having everything go his way at this point in the race because he's on the inside, on that coveted hedge path in behind the leaders, whereas Street Vendor, you saw coming around the clubhouse turn, he was in the 2 to the 3 path, a little bit wide, and he's just going to never get towards the inside in this race. And when you've got horses that were races where some ride the rail and some are outside, I like to look at the track data that's available on the NYRA website. And looking at the track data for this race, Street Vendor going 2 to 3 wide around both turns is going to cover 41 more feet than Flip the Script, who was on the rail for the entire race. Now, the reason that I'm talking about Flip the Script is because as they come to the top of the stretch, you're going to see that one horse gets in the clear, that being Street Vendor, and the other horse is just going to get in all sorts of trouble racing down on the inside. And you see Luis Saez in that white cap on Flip the Script, the number 10, trying to find room between horses, whereas Street Vendor is angling to the outside to make his run. And it looks like Flip the Script is being a little bit difficult for Sias to handle. He's got his head turned a little bit. It seems like he's trying to lug in. It appears that not only is he in some traffic, but he's not really cooperating with the rider's signals, whereas Street Vendor just took him a really long time to get going. He was one of these plodding types who didn't hit his best stride until the very end of the race. Now, I think the question is, who had the tougher trip? Because the first inclination might be to say, okay, Flip the Script had all that trouble in the late stages. He couldn't make his run. Maybe he would have won the race if he had gotten into the clear, but he would have won the race with an absolutely perfect trip, riding the hedge the entire way, saving ground, and riding a track bias. Whereas Flip the Script was off the rail the entire way, was a little bit green, and actually ran the fastest final quarter mile of anybody in this race. Looking at, again, at the track data, they give you the final quarter mile statistics, and Street Vendor ran his final quarter in 22.88 seconds, which is really fast for a 2-year-old. And considering that he needed to be niggled at the entire way, was a little bit green, I thought he put in a pretty nice late run. So I think both of these horses might have some talent, but you do have to kind of decide for yourself which trip was worse. Personally, I would rather take Street Vendor. I think he might have more upside than Flip the Script, who had so much go his way before he had that trouble in the stretch. Move on to a race on the other turf course, the Mellon turf course. This is a turf sprint for the New York bred maiden claimers. $40,000 is the tag, fillies and mares. Let's break these runners from the gate and again start by looking at the head-on of the number 7 New York Supreme. And I should mention this is the 6th race at Saratoga on Sunday. And there's New York Supreme in between horses, kind of like with that first time starter that we saw in the dirt. She just gets badly sandwiched between horses and gets knocked all the way towards the back of the pack. And you're going to see it again right here. The jockey kind of has to almost sit down in the stirrups as he's trying to get her out of that trouble between horses when she's just getting bounced around as they come out of the gate. And the problems are going to get even worse here as they move into the clubhouse turn, because there are a couple horses in front of her who are going to be pretty difficult to handle. One of them is the number 6 Candy Monet in that pink cap right inside of New York Supreme, and the other is the horse on the lead, the number 2 Prairie Tales. And as they come around the far turn, you're going to see both of these horses start to drift out significantly, and actually New York Supreme is just getting so badly forced out that she's in about the 7 or 8 path by the time they get to the top of the stretch here. And I mean, she is just so wide, and that's especially significant to note because the horse who wins the race is that one all the way on the right of your screen, the number 1 Write This Down, who just slipped through up the rail while New York Supreme was having so much trouble getting pushed out on the far turn. And all things considered, New York Supreme runs a remarkable race to get as close to the winner as she does at the finish line. And again, I looked at the track data for this race. New York Supreme covered 52 more feet than the winner of this race, the number 1 Write This Down, which is just as high a margin as you're going to see a difference between a first and second place finisher in a 1-turn race. Typically, you see in 2-turn races where they go around the entire circuit of the track, horses traveling 52 more feet than another one. But in a 1-turn race, that just is a testament to how much more ground New York Supreme covered. And she was making her second start off the layoff here for Tom Bush, had shown some improvement first off the break, and I think she took a big step forward here, but she wasn't able to win because of that difficult trip. So I think she's one that they could even explore moving up in class to the maiden special weight level next to out because she ran so well against this maiden claiming field. And she's definitely a horse that's finding herself now at the age of 4 after kind of being a runoff speed type early in her career. I think that she's matured now as a 4-year-old. Talk about one more race from that Sunday card. It's the 7th race, an optional claiming 80,000. Non-winners of one other than going a mile and a 16th, again on the inner turf course. So we're going to pay attention to those rail trips. Let's break these horses from the gate. We're going to focus on 2 runners, the number 8 Treason and the number 10 Shawdy. And the real problem in this race is you've got a large field of 12 runners. There was not much speed signed on, and the riders make it even worse on themselves because nobody shows any aggression. The only rider that kind of takes the bull by the horns and decides to take the initiative is the rider of the number 6, Sigiloso, Eric Hansel, who actually allows his horse to go onto the lead, even though he wasn't a speed type in this race. And he's actually going to get rewarded for that because as a long shot, Sigiloso finishes second in this race. But the 2 horses that I want to highlight, Treason, he's just getting shoveled back between horses in those green and yellow silks, and Shawdy Shawdy in those red and purple silks at the back of the pack, second to last now, just gets pushed out so wide around the clubhouse turn because his rider, even though he broke aggressively, showed no aggression in the early stages of this race, and he's going to be 4 wide around the entire racetrack. Treason in those green silks now right inside of Shawdy towards the back of the pack. Again, Treason's the number 8. Shawdy is right outside of him, the number 10. Treason's in the 2 to 3 path for most of the race, so he's not losing as much ground as Shawdy. But like I said, being on the hedge was the big advantage. So even being in the 2 path is compromising these horses a little bit. And you're going to notice the 4 horses who complete the superfecta in this race are the horses that you see on the rail right now. The number 6, the number 5, the number 12, and the number 2. You see them in a line right now on the hedge. They're the 4 horses who complete the superfecta, and they're Shawdy at the back. Again, 4 wide into the stretch. But look at Treason. He's the one who really does some running in the stretch of this race after getting a little shuffled back further around the far turn, not able to find running room in that congested field on the far turn. His rider, Dylan Davis, finally is able to ankle him out into the clear, but he has to go wide to do it, which is not ideal in the stretch. And all things considered, he's finishing best of all at the end of this race, but just given the trip that he got, he was never going to be successful, and he actually did well to finish 5th in this race at a bit of a price. Treason, he's now had bad trips in 2 starts in a row. He was wide in his prior start at Saratoga, again, wide against a bias here with a shuffled back trip on the far turn. So he's definitely a horse that has more ability than what we've seen in his last 2 starts, and he was so impressive in his debut. I do think Treason is eventually going to get back to that first stout effort. Shawdy is kind of a more difficult horse to assess because his form is really dirtied up at this point. He obviously had no chance with the trip he got in this race. He was coming off a couple of off-the-turf races where he ran on the dirt. In his start 4 back prior to that, he just didn't get the right trip either in a stakes race behind Hard Love. So I think that he might also be better than it seems for Jorge Abreu, but you have to wonder if he can get back to that good form that he had as a 2-year-old if he gets a better trip, because he's had so much working against him from a circumstantial standpoint in his last 4 races. So both of these, I think, are ones that could do better at prices when they run next time out. Well, those were all the horses to watch for this week. There was a lot to talk about this week. Again, if you want to follow some of these trips, I tweeted out some others that you could take a look at on my Twitter at Horse to Watch. And if you want to follow the horses that I highlighted on this episode, you can add them to your watch mail at drf.com. Just go to Horse Watch, add these horses to a list, and you'll get email notifications when they run back in the future. So thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch future episodes of Horses to Watch on upcoming Wednesdays.